By video conference, the Honourable Member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Today we are once again talking about the hate that 2S LGBTQIA community continues to be subjected to. It is important that I state it that way, because that is the truth about what continues to happen in Canada, even with the progress we have made. Without adequate protections and legal provisions, Canadians do experience hate, with the pain and suffering that comes along with it. I can't wait for the day when everyone in this country will be free to be themselves, celebrated fully, without shame, without fear for who they are, and feel confident that they will be loved and represented in all corners of our society. Someone once said, if you can't love yourself, how are you going to love somebody else? And I have no doubt that our charter supports that intent. With that in mind, I'm honored to speak to Bill C-6, an act to amend the criminal code to include provisions that will limit the negative impacts of conversion therapy in Canada, though I must begin by saying that it doesn't go far enough to actually eliminate it. Last week, I had the privilege of discussing how the rights of 2S LGBTQIA Canadians were fought for, confirmed, and celebrated in recent decades in a response to the ministerial address the day Bill C-6 was tabled. My Green colleagues and I will certainly be voting for this bill. And when we do, I will be thinking of the people I have met along the way that have suffered conversion therapy and the shame and self-loathing they have had to overcome as a direct result. Many Canadians and many members in this House have seen the biographical drama Boy Erased, describing the journey of a young man from Arkansas who traveled to Tennessee to participate in a conversion therapy program. It is easy for us to hear that story and clearly denote that conversion therapy is wrong. It is easy to tell ourselves that it doesn't happen here. The truth is that it does. It just flies under the radar. It is more insidious. I have a constituent, a brave man, who spoke with a CBC journalist a couple years ago to share his story in the hope of helping others. He grew up in a rural New Brunswick community. Outed as a teenager by his browser history, my constituent was sent to a religious counseling service in a nearby town. He was told that he needed to pray for God's help to change, that what he was feeling was simply a sinful choice. The counselor suggested my constituent mentally put his gay feelings in a box and ask God to help keep that box closed. And she offered tips to avoid future temptation, tips like avoid flamboyant situations. I'm so glad he ignored that ridiculous advice. This constituent of mine is a leader in our community and an inspiration for young people today to celebrate who they are. The damage done by his experience with conversion therapy left him to fight feelings of shame throughout his adolescence and young adulthood. The truth is, in church basements and family homes across our country, children, youth, and adults are being taught to hide who they are because it is something to be ashamed of. The real shame here is the damage we are doing to these young minds and hearts. We are limiting their capabilities by stunting their personal growth. We are dimming their light. The harm that this process causes to people is immeasurable. It reinforces stigma, myths, and lies. It has a profound impact on the ability of a person to love themselves, to have self-confidence. There is a recognition worldwide of the destructive nature of this practice and an acknowledgement that criminal law is an appropriate way to address that harm. We are not criminalizing conversations as we have so callously heard in this House. There should be no doubt about what conversion therapy is and our responsibility to stop it from happening. Yesterday, during his intervention, the Minister of Justice said that the purpose of this bill is to criminalize conduct related to conversion therapy. He said that putting an end to conversion therapy is a reflection of the government's commitment to eradicating a discriminatory practice that is out of step with Canadian values. He reminded us that multiple professional associations recognize that conversion therapy can lead to various negative impacts on mental and physical health, contributing in some cases to death by suicide. I could not agree more with the minister. We must put an end to conversion therapy. So I can't help but wonder why we aren't going all the way with this bill, instead leaving the door open for a dangerous loophole. Bill C-6 bans the practice of conversion therapy for minors, but not for adults. The specific phrasing that one cannot cause a person to undergo conversion therapy against their will falls short of providing meaningful protection for the exact Canadians most likely to face pressure from their loved ones to undergo the therapy. Leaving the door open to conversion therapy through the notion that one might choose to engage in this abusive practice means forcing Canadians to make an impossible choice: undergo the experience or lose the love and support of your family. This bill does take the clear and unequivocal step of precluding someone from profiting from conversion therapy. It makes it impossible to advertise the service, regardless of whether it is provided to minors or adults. If it's wrong, then it's wrong. We know conversion therapy is abusive and cruel. The minister correctly affirmed that it is a discriminatory practice that is out of step with Canadian values. As parliamentarians, shouldn't we be aiming to uphold the rights of all Canadians to protect their safety and security? When something causes harm, it is a legitimate decision of government to criminalize the practice. I'll actually go a step further, leaving queer Canadians across this country with the burden of navigating these conversations with their families and expecting them to stand firm against coercion without the backing of a law that truly denounces the practice amounts to cowardice. We are leaving these Canadians to confront an issue that we are not bold enough to take on ourselves in the public sphere. I think of the constituent I mentioned earlier. I mourn the time he has lost overcoming shame he should never have been made to feel. Together, we can make this bill into what it needs to be for all Canadians so that no one goes through what he has experienced. I am looking forward to voting for this bill, and I will be tabling amendments to strengthen it at committee stage. If I can be clear today about one thing, let it be this. Whatever your identity, be it two-spirit, lesbian, gay, bisexual, trans, queer, intersex, asexual, or otherwise, you belong. Your right to security of the person is as valid as for any heterosexual cisgendered Canadian. You are an integral part of our communities across Canada, and we are here today to fight with you and for future generations to feel the respect and love that they deserve. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker.
Pardon me, we're just in conversation here and didn't realize the honourable member had finished up there, so my apologies. We will now go to questions and comments, and the Honourable Parliamentary Secretary to the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I appreciate the comments made by the member of the Green Party. And just wanted to add some thoughts when we talk about the importance of C6. And it's receiving fairly good response inside the House, as I anticipate that it will actually receive a good majority of members voting. It would be wonderful to see it be of a unanimous nature in terms of the vote, but I don't think that's going to happen. Having said that, we can always be optimistic, but I think the legislation is just one important component. It's a very important step. But also what we have seen is that we need to do more than just legislative measures. And, you know, in talking with the Minister of Diversity, we had an exchange about the importance of capacity and the government committing literally millions of dollars to build capacity for organizations dealing with advocacy and so forth. And I'm wondering if my friend could just provide her thoughts and comments on how important it is that not only do we just have legislation, but we also do things like build on capacity.
Well, member for Fredericton.
And thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the member for his question. And I raised this question to him this morning about providing more investments and services. So this is one step, absolutely. I think it's an important step, and as I mentioned, I wish that it goes further to protect adults as well. But certainly, as I mentioned earlier about the wraparound care that we need, there's so much more we can do in our society to ensure that people are included, that they are represented, and that they're protected. And particularly, I highlighted once again the need for, specializations in trans care and in care that supports the 2S LGBTQI community. So I'm thinking about clinics like Clinic 554 in Fredericton that should be supported and must continue to do the important work that they do, but we must go much further as well to also support programs and information within schools across sectors. So I thank the member once again for that important question.
Questions and comments? The Honourable Member for Sarnia-Lambton.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I'd like to thank the member opposite for her speech. One of the things I'd like to say up front, I think all Canadians are opposed to anyone being forced to have therapy that they don't want. But when we studied conversion therapy at Health Committee last year, there was a disturbing conversation that we had, and the gist of it was that I was describing a youth leader that had members of their youth group who were confused about their sexual orientation, and the leader then was explaining, the position of the church with respect to sexuality. And I said, if somebody voluntarily wanted that advice, isn't that their right to get it? And the discussion from the NDP and the Liberals was that no, in fact, that person should be put in jail, that youth leader. And I mean, that seemed very offside to me. So I'm concerned for people's freedom of religion, to make sure that we narrow the definition so that we know that we're talking about conversion therapy that's forced on somebody. Is this one of the amendments the member is going to bring?
The honourable member for Fredericton.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank the honourable member as well for that important question. So the amendments that we were specifically discussing within my team really focus on the protections for adults, and so it really does come into play with what you're bringing up. And really, I think what's going to be important here is the witness testimony at committee stage, and I'm very much looking forward to that, because we do need to understand the intricacies and the nuances of this conversation. I want to ensure that all Canadians are protected, including religious freedom. That's an important piece here as well. So we'll have to, I think, wait to see for the details to kind of really emerge within that committee stage. Thank you very much.
Dernière question.
Last question. By video conference, the honourable member for Drummond. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for Fredericton for her, as always, eloquent speech. In her speech, she mentioned that Bill C6 seeks to protect minors and children against conversion therapy. But she did say something about vulnerable adults who might end up being forced by people around them to avail themselves of this type of procedure. So I'd like her to specify what type of vulnerable adults she's talking about and how we can better assist those individuals. Thank you. The honourable member for Fredericton. Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to thank my colleague for that important question.
That this bill holds, and it's certainly important to protect our minors in our communities, but it goes back to the very core issue of the concept of conversion therapy, which is that coercion piece. It's that idea of that pressure that you might feel from your family to go through with this at any stage in your life, instead of feeling that love and acceptance that they so deserve. And so really, that's the piece that I want to highlight again, is that this should be for all Canadians, regardless of your age. And it's important that we talked about that piece for not receiving money for this or being able to advertise. So there is a protection there, but I think it does need to go further to explicitly ban outright the practice to protect adults as well. Thank you, Merci.